Welcome to the Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show with your hosts, Jesse McCullough and Nick Dorich. We will talk quality of healthcare and explore what that actually means. Let's dig into performance measurements, the Equip platform, and maybe de-stress and divert from the pharmacy conversation with occasional talk about nerdy passions and hobbies. Without further ado, here's Jesse and Nick.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show. I'm Jesse McCullough. Hey, I wanted to reach out to you listeners here right off the bat, just give you an update on some changes that you need to expect coming to the Quality Corner Show over the next several weeks. As the year comes to an end, a new opportunity has arisen for me professionally, and that's going to take me away from this podcast, at least as a regular guest. Perhaps I'll be back from time to time. And as such, I'm going to be turning you over to the very capable hands of my co-host, Nick Dorich. And speaking of Nick, Nick, how are you doing today, my friend?
Hey, Jess, I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad we have you on here as well, and that you're able to share a message with the listeners. Wishing you all the best going forward. And I think for today, we're going to be talking about some things that are going to be, talking about new starts and how we're going to be talking about New Year's resolutions and how, we as pharmacists and how we as pharmacy professionals can reach new goals and new achievements for 2020. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion today.
I'm looking forward to that too. And I'm also looking forward to our other guest here today, and the listeners will recognize this voice, and this is a former guest that we've had on the show, but we're bringing our voiceover intro, Brittany Boyd, in to be part of the team today. So Brittany, how are you doing today?
Doing all right, Jesse. Hello to everyone in podcast listening land. Interested in what we're going to talk about today. New Year's resolutions are typically a big player for mostly everybody going into the new year. Everyone likes to do the new year, new me. So excited to be on this podcast with you and Nick and getting some chatting going about what we can do, how we can help pharmacies next year.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get us started. And when I was researching the topic for this podcast, let me tell you, there was no shortage of links that I could find about setting New Year's resolutions, what's successful, what is not successful. So there's definitely a lot of information, and we wanted to talk about some of those items, but also make it specific for a pharmacy team. And I do mean pharmacy team. We mean pharmacy team in that to you as the listener, maybe you're a pharmacist, maybe you're a pharmacy owner that is not a pharmacist, maybe you're a pharmacy technician or intern. So we think it's important to bring all of that in here. It does take a team to be successful. And normally when we're talking about setting a New Year's resolution, or setting multiple New Year's resolutions, it's tending to be things like exercising more, learning a new skill, living life to the fullest. And but we wanted to think about things that, what are good New Year's resolutions for pharmacy teams? So with that, Jess, I'll kick it over to you. Have you provide some thoughts, and then Brittany, you can add in some specifics that you have as well.
Thanks, Nick. I'll tell you, when it comes down to it, New Year's resolutions, at least from my perspective, it's more of a brand name, if you will, for goal setting. And from my experience and my perspective, there's a couple of different buckets of goals to set for a pharmacy. Some would be what I would call achievement goals, something that you want to be able to accomplish, and that may be to fill a certain number of prescriptions in a day or a week or a month, or it may be to provide a certain number of immunizations or to complete a certain number of projects, whatever that turns out to be. But those very much become what I would just generally call achievement goals. And then the other bucket that I would throw out there is just something that I would call more of a habit goal, something that you get into doing on a very regular basis. So Nick, you used the example of, a lot of people have the New Year's resolution of, I want to exercise more, right? And that's very much a habit. It's something that you want to, you want to get into that regular cadence of doing. I think regardless of which bucket you're really looking to get into, perhaps the biggest step in this whole thing is the adjusting of your mindset, and really, saying, as a pharmacy team, this is where we want to go, and getting everybody on board, whether it's an achievement goal, whether it's a habit goal. I think that's really one of the big things that I would put on the table, because especially if you have a bigger team. Last year I traveled in stores, and I was in one store, and I would say that there were at least 20 people working behind the counter. So depending on what your situation is, there's a big part of this, which is getting everybody on the same page as you go forward. Now, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody else, but Brittany, I'm going to throw it over to you just to see if you have other thoughts or other reactions.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. I'd have to agree with all of your input and with Nick's as well. I think everyone every year has a new goal or a new thing that they want to try to accomplish for the year, and that the start of the year is their way to do it. Myself, I can be honest that I've set a lot of New Year's resolutions. Have I achieved them all? Probably not, but I have set them. So for pharmacy teams, those that may have, 20 people that are behind the counter, to your point, Jesse, but then also taking Nick's example that learn a new skill and live to the fullest. We've been to a lot of conferences this year that have actually kind of wrapped around the idea of the pharmacy staff and getting an understanding that each one of them have an acquired taste of what their position already is, but what else can you do in the pharmacy, and what other steps could you potentially take to impact where you are? As an example, one pharmacy group that they had recently hired on a community health worker. This was a technician that was a delivery driver, but they were actually doing a little bit more. So what does this now give them? This gives them different responsibilities, new goals they can set for themselves. This now gives them something else to look forward to. So when jumping into the new year, you're thinking about new things, new goals to accomplish. It's thinking about your staff holistically, and thinking about how each one of you can make an impact, continuing on with the impact you've already made, but also setting a new one. So New Year is a great way to not necessarily hit the reset button, but to just hit the start button and, start at the starting point of your marathon and figuring out how to keep it going.
Thanks to both of you, Jess and Brittany. And to summarize there, a couple things that I got out of it will reinforce for our listeners, talking about achievement goals versus habit goals. I definitely agree with that. I find that some of the best New Year's resolutions that I have set have been ones about changing habits. It may not necessarily mean I'm achieving something or getting a certificate, but does it make me feel better as a person or as an individual, or or with my teammates? I think those are very important items. And then learning new skills, having something that's tangible, but that we can see, and that we're utilizing everybody to the fullest of their capabilities. I think those are important items. When we're looking at these, and we're looking at, let's talk about how a pharmacy group, pharmacy staff members, how they're identifying goals, because this is going to lead into the additional question that we'll get to later. But when we're talking about goals, an important aspect is that those goals are realistic, and that those goals can be achievable. So when we're talking about goals for a pharmacy, these could be important things like improving the business of the pharmacy, improving patient care services, improving the staff and their development that are there. How would you go about applying and recommending goals to identify for a pharmacy team? I realize that for all pharmacies, they're going to be operating differently, but there's a lot of commonalities. And Jess and Brittany, you both have a lot of experience working directly with pharmacists. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. What has been successful or not successful from your experiences working with pharmacies that do go about their own goal setting?
Yeah, Nick, I think that's really an important piece to be looking at, as we started to record here. And for the listeners out there to the podcast, when we record these, we do this with a technology that allows us to see each other. So we're giving some notes and signals to each other as we go through this. But next to where I'm recording, I actually have my New Year's resolutions from 2017 here. And it's really interesting as I look through that list. Obviously, that's a couple of years old now. It's an interesting piece to it. But when it comes down to making that list of goals and how you identify or what you would recommend to do that, one of the things that I would encourage pharmacies to do is to do a SWOT analysis. SWOT, of course, being the acronym for what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your opportunities, what are your threats in the marketplace. Not all pharmacies have the same situation, right? I've had the opportunity to visit pharmacies in the inner cities. I've had the opportunity to visit pharmacies in very rural country. There's different strengths, there's different weaknesses, there's different opportunities, there's different threats to all of those particular things. And, so take a little bit of time and look at that and see where are those things where, one, you want to get better and you potentially have the opportunity to get better. You may want to do some type of one of the things that we did years ago was to work on a travel immunization or travel medicine clinic, right? Doing that in a place where you don't really have people that do international travel. That may not be the best opportunity that you have there in the marketplace, and maybe that's a bit of a poor example, but perhaps it also helps to illustrate, for you where in your particular situation. But something that I would encourage you, no matter where you're at, is to also take into consideration what are those elements that you have the most control over as you do these resolutions. One, we can want to have healthier patients at the end of the year, and that's definitely a noble resolution to undertake. But sometimes you have to take a couple of steps back from that as well to say, okay, how do we end up getting healthier patients at the end of the year? Nick, you and I have talked several times about, medication adherence. One of the goals could be, hey, we want to have more adherent patients at the end of the year. And one of the things that, when you take a couple of steps back, you say, you know what, we need to make sure that our staff is better in helping to identify and push this forward. So, I would also throw that out as something to consider is, what are those things that you can control? And I think one of those things that you can control is just your staff and the training or the emphasis that you use with them. Brittany, I see some reaction from you, so I want to make sure I give you a time to chime in here, and feel free to correct me if you have different observations there as well, my friend.
No, Jesse, I actually totally agree with you. In agreement primarily to the SWOT analysis. Nick, I don't know if you remember earlier this year when we as a team, we all did a SWOT analysis individually about different things that we wanted to accomplish and how we were going to do those. We each had something very different, but the tactics still remained the same. What's going to be the strength, the weakness, your opportunity, and what may threaten you from not completing that goal. So Jesse, I agree with you in its entirety. One of my experiences I could think of is working in the specialty space of just figuring out what works for you, what doesn't, and what kind of your goal is at the end of the day. And for a lot of our listeners, I know that you all are in different pharmacy spaces, so this is just my experience of it. But one of the takes that we had on what our goals were and actually setting them was focusing more on the patients in the community and how we actually do that. So one of the things we decided to take on was hosting a fundraiser. And it was really just to be able to make our presence known in the area to show that we are here, but being specialty, being closed door, they don't really get to see you that much. Not in the way that with an independent pharmacy, you all may see the same people on a consistent basis. Or if you're working in the chain level, still having that same relation of being definitely more patient centered and definitely being more front facing with those patients. So hosting that really brought us back to Jesse's point also of knowing that you have staff, you have pharmacists, technicians, everyone that is there and keeping patients healthy at the end of the year. That's what everyone wants to do, right? But what else can you do to really show the value that you have there, and that goal is really being solidified, is making everyone there, holding everyone accountable, getting a goal together that is actionable, that everyone can achieve, that you're able to actually step to and continue to press forward through the end of the year. Most of us with New Year's resolutions, you started off January 1, you're gung-ho, you're ready for the year to start, and everyone's good with their goals. You got your checklist down. And then, by August, September, somewhere, it tends to fall off, similar to the history and year-over-year performance of some adherence for some patients. We typically start to see that kind of go down. So making sure that you are keeping everyone involved, everyone aware of what your goals are, and keeping that notable that you all can actually do it.
And
Nick,
those are, yeah,
can
Jess, go ahead.
I just want to add something because Brittany made some excellent points there. But for the listeners, something else that I would encourage you to do is, set that lofty goal, right? Especially for your pharmacy. You don't, we use the example of adherence. You don't want to say, hey, we want to improve adherence from 75 to 76%. I would encourage you to also consider a bit of an aggressive goal, something that gets the whole team involved. If it's you really just don't want something that's too easy. And one of the things, as Brittany was talking, that came to mind is something that my mentor tells me, and he says to me that one is too small a number to achieve significance. And you really want to have something that really helps galvanize your team and pulls it together. So as you go forward, and that can help sustain you, because to your example, Brittany, when August rolls around, some people may, if the goal's too easy, you may have already accomplished it and fallen off the wagon, or whatever it turns out to be. So just something to consider there as well. But I would encourage our listeners to think, be aggressive. You might as well go big here, right? So.
It's an important consideration there, Jess, and it's how I would look at this is that you need to have something that you definitely cover, a goal that you can definitely hit. You want to have something that's going to take some work. You're going to have to roll up the sleeves and put in some efforts. And then you want to have something that really is a stretch goal, and it gets people out of their comfort zone, because if we're not achieving these things, it's going to be very difficult for it to be seen with a purpose. But the final question that I'll pose for the both of you here in this conversation, and we could go a lot longer, but we'll try to keep it to 20 minutes or so of content. According to U.S. News and World Report, more than 80% of New Year's resolutions fail or are not achieved. And we just talked a little bit about having stretch goals and why that's important and why that's good. But we do want to make sure we do have some traction with these goals. I think that both Jess and Brittany, you alluded to some elements of this in your prior points, but I did want to take a look at this and say, what are your tips? What are your tricks? Let's see if we can identify one thing for each of us that we would recommend to make sure that we do achieve our goals. And to give it a little bit of a twist, let's think about those intermediate or stretch goals. What's the best tip or trick you have for reaching that stretch goal specifically?
I'll start off, Nick, if I may, and just chime in with this. Going back to the reference between achievement goals and habit goals, I would look to see if there's some synergy between those. So, I'll use this as an example. A lot of people for their New Year's resolution say, I want to lose 10 pounds, 20 pounds. Some of us could lose a little more than that. But when it comes down to it, that's an achievement goal that I can set, but I can also couple that with the habit goal. And that habit goal could be, I want to exercise 30 minutes a day, 3 times a week. And those become things that I can set up, and I can monitor and be, sort of linking those things together to be able to achieve that goal. To me, those are some of the things that really stick out in at least in my mind's eye, as how you can sort of link those things together with whatever it turns out to be. And then that way you can just be building on those throughout the year to be able to hit your goal.
And Brittany, how about from your end?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback off Jesse a bit and also take some inspiration from one of my favorite musical artists. But a key point I can kind of give back to the listeners here is that it's levels to this. So if you set your goal, that higher goal, a little bit further out, and you start at maybe the first part of that goal, well, then you know that once this is completed, I now can move to level 2, and then continue to step into it and have something else to achieve as time goes on, so that end goal does not get missed. There is not a one-way straight road to completion. It's going to take some twists, some turns. It's going to be maybe, some time lapse that may even go on. But if you actually have different steps, different things that you want to basically check off on that box, and people that are accountable for those things, achieving that goal and maintaining, that energy for it that is going to be achievable and it doesn't get lost anywhere throughout the year, is making sure that those levels are essentially met.
Yep, those are all great items there, and really appreciate the thoughts and considerations that you both have. I know that for myself, I started really placing, and Jess, you referenced 2017 for your goal sheet. I'm sure you may have had some earlier that you did. I can say for my own personal well-being, I really started doing a goal set in 2018. And I started doing it at that time because I just didn't like some of my habits, and I didn't really like how that was lending itself for some of my achievements there. And yes, I am stealing from Jess's words that were shared earlier in this podcast about setting goals. And I can tell you, I have not, I haven't hit all of those goals. I've had a pretty good success rate. I'm definitely not in that 80% failure rate for New Year's resolutions that I've had them, but working to improve that. And I know for this year, I'm setting new goals and new ideas for myself. Jess and Brittany, any final comments or maybe a goal that you want to share that you're taking for yourself as we go into the 2020 year?
Yeah, I'll share just a couple of comments here. One, it's real easy to sit down and make a list of goals. Just with the tablet that I had here next to the recording station, I had a list of 20 goals on that. And something I just want to remind the listeners that there's nothing that says that these goals all have to be reached in January, right? To some extent, you can sort of space them out over the course of the year. I would also encourage you to do this. I would encourage you to go what I would say is old school and get a piece of paper, get a pen or a pencil, and write them down. Because some of the best advice I got was that, when you take the time and you write it down, that helps rewire your brain. And there's probably a whole lot of like neuropsychology or something that goes into that. And I'll leave that to somebody much more intelligent than myself to explain. But the way that it was best captured and the way that it sticks with me is that when you go to work on your goals go to work on you. And what I have found is that when you take the time to write this stuff down, somehow it just gets implanted in your head, and you'll come back months later and you'll look at that list of goals and you'll be like, oh yeah, I've been doing that, or I've got that done. And it just helps to solidify that in your mind to be working towards that. That being said, Nick, you'd asked what's something that I want to do in the coming year. One of the things that I am a huge subscriber to is that we must always continue to improve our skills. I will tell you that I didn't always subscribe to that. I spent way too many years thinking that, the skills that I had when I left pharmacy school were more than enough to sustain me throughout the course of my career. Even the whole immunization training phase that came around, probably about 15 years ago, going through the MTM phase after that, going through, point of care testing and whatever the next phases are going to be. You want to be intentional about developing those particular things. But one of the things that I do just to keep myself in that mindset is around reading. Just reading books. And, I had a conversation with a colleague over the weekend who said, Jess, I make it a point to read, a chapter a week. And that's not all that aggressive. But he said, over the course of the year, I read 9 books, so he was able to get through, and that can make a huge difference in how you approach things. I might be a little more aggressive than that to say, hey, you may want to read a chapter a day or whatever it is. The most aggressive I've been, and this is not going to impress a lot of our listeners, I know, but my best year was I read 26 books, right? I would like to be in that ballpark again in this coming year, because that's just going to help keep me open to new ideas or new ways of doing things, new ways of engaging with people, and as we get more effective with that, I think that can help us to be more effective and more impactful in the communities that we serve.
Thanks. And Brittany, how about yourself?
Yeah. So, Jesse, I totally agree with the old school way of pen and paper. Nick can attest to this. And Jesse, you may have even seen me do it in certain places we've been together. But I have a black leather notebook that I keep, and I write in it every meeting, every conference that we do, and I take it with me everywhere I go. I think that it absolutely kind of digs into your memory a little bit more when you actually are writing out what your goal is, because you actually have to take time out to think about what it is that you want to accomplish and what it is that you want to do, the same way you write a grocery list. If you're like me, you go in a grocery store and you kind of lose train of thought if you don't write that list out or if you don't refer back to it. If you're writing up a recipe, which is I do often, and if you don't write it all down, you're going to forget the first step that you would have done. So I totally agree with Jesse's thoughts. I also think that as we move on, not even into 2020, but just in, as years go on, that we continue to challenge ourselves. Pharmacies continue to want to reach that next level, that next goal, that next step, as a staff, and how you all are, delivering care to your patients is definitely very intricate and very important. And to make it brief and easy here, one of my goals for next year is definitely not as aggressive as Mr. McCullough's, but is to do more and spend wisely. Having bought a new home, my husband is very adamant with letting me know that my shoe budget is getting cut next year. So I have to do a little bit, have to be a little bit more easy on that. But with that comes more time to, do things more at home, spend more time with family, but only spending for really kind of what you need, not so much for what you want. So that's another thing the pharmacies can take back. Make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do to service your goals, service your patients, fulfill yourself, service your staff, and those things that you may want will probably come in time. But that, if you focus on your goal and that is achievable, put the actions to it, that you absolutely can do it in 2020 and the years to come. So,
Jess, I think you have a response or something that caught your attention as Brittany was talking.
Absolutely. I had to smile, and again, to the listener, Brittany has a huge smile on her face, and it's going to get bigger as I tell her this. Brittany's shoe budget was cut, is what she shared with us. I want you to know that, Nick and Brittany, that my wife told me that my shoe budget has to increase because one of the things that I've wanted to do is to be more physically active, to be out running and walking and stuff like that. And she says one pair of shoes is not going to last you for the whole year, which has generally been my modus operandi. I'll walk till the sole falls off the bottom of my shoe. So my shoe budget has been increased when Brittany's has been decreased. So
your wife is a smart woman, Jesse. It needs to be increased.
So anyway, I couldn't let that one pass.
Yeah. No, and Jess, I appreciate you sharing that story here to close us out. And I want to thank both Brittany and Jess, both of you, for joining on for the conversation. And to me, this has been a really fascinating discussion for the podcast. For our listeners, this is very different than what our previous episodes have been like. We actually discussed very little here that was pharmacy specific, but as an organization, we take it upon ourselves to put a spotlight on quality improvement. And while that does often focus on the quality measures and how we're improving patient care, there's a lot that goes into it about process and our mindset. And we thought that this was an important topic that we needed to bring about a little bit of change and different in the approach to the podcast. And I think as we go forward, we'll have more episodes that are like this. So if you're looking for more clinical pharmacy content or more discussion on population health measures, I apologize that we didn't hit your preference on this episode, but we'll get other episodes like that back into the show rotation. And one goal that I can share about 2020 and for the Quality Corner show is that we're going to be looking to have on more guests, both from the PQS team, but also externally. So hopefully here we shared some pretty good thoughts, but there's lots of other smart people out there that can talk about these topics with us, and we'll look forward to having them on board with the show. But that's all that we have for today. And what we're going to do here, Jess, we're going to hand it off to you for our sign off with today's podcast.
All right. I'll bring us in for a landing here today. Folks, listeners of the podcast, just want to say thank you. As I come to the end of this particular phase, I want to thank you for the support you've given over the last several months as we've got this podcast up and running off the ground. I thank you so much for that because you actually give something that is very, very valuable. You give your time to support this. And I would ask that if you have found value from listening to this episode or any episode, that you do us a favor and that you share this podcast with a couple of your friends, because if you share this with a couple of friends and they share it with a couple of friends, that really helps us get the word out. I also want to encourage, if you found value in this podcast, to give us a subscribe. Wherever it is that you found this podcast, give us a subscribe. We look to deliver you a new episode about once a week. So we can just have that delivered right to your mobile device with that. When we come together here, we like to discuss things that are of importance and interest to you, and we want to hear your feedback. So feel free to share any questions, comments that you may have with us for the podcast by emailing us at info@pharmacyquality.com. Again, that's info@pharmacyquality.com. Going forward, Nick is going to be assembling a mighty band of people to address these particular topics that affect quality in the pharmacy space. And so they will be coming together to be able to share some different perspectives and experiences that I think you are going to find valuable. So we encourage you to continue to tune in. So with that, I wish you all very well, and we will catch you next time.